Test 1, 2. press here, and that activates the microphone, and then we go, testing English, and we have to watch Arthur, because if he can hear us, he will give us a thumbs up, and if he can't, he will sort of do what he's doing. Okay, so English is good, and then... Make it red. There you go.
All right. Testing English. Thank you.
Testing. Okay, so he just gave a thumbs up.
Check, check. Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, if we could ask members of council to take your seat, we'll start the meeting in 1 moment. On va commencer la réunion dans 1 minute. Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Bienvenue à la réunion du Conseil.
Welcome to the City Council meeting of June 24th.
The 24th of June. For those who are able to, please rise for a moment of reflection and remain standing for the singing of our national anthem. Thank you, merci. It's now my pleasure to ask our colleague, Councillor Tim Tierney, to introduce our very special guest speaker who will sing our national anthem. Councillor.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It gives me great pleasure to introduce David Lovett. He's in grade 6. He's a huge fan of the Beatles. I give him a lot of credit for that. Bravo. He's been doing jiu-jitsu for about 3 years. His favorite subject at school is language arts. He's really looking forward to relaxing this summer after a successful graduation. He's recently won the St. John Paul II Idol Contest, singing Bruno Mars' Uptown Funk. Well, I thought about adding that today, but we didn't have quite enough time. Yeah, exactly. And he was also in the lead role of the school play Peter Pan this year, and I think the mayor and I we've actually had the opportunity in the past to see the great productions that St. John Paul puts on. There might be a video of us dancing. That might come out one day. But nonetheless, I give you David Lovett.
Matt, there we go. Thank you very much, David, and to, I believe, your teacher and principal who are here from your school in Beacon Hill, Cedarville. Thank you for being with us today. J'aimerais maintenant inviter...
Now I'd like to invite Louis Patry to join us on the podium in order to receive the City Builders Award.
At the request of Louis, Councillors Blais and Monette, if they could come forward, who have worked very closely with Louis for many, many years. Bienvenue, Louis, et merci d'accepter notre invitation.
Thank you, Louis. Thank you for accepting our invitation, as well as Councillor Monette and Jody Middick. I believe that it's very opportune today, on this Saint Jean-Baptiste Day, a celebration for French Canadians throughout the country, to give us the opportunity to underline what is done in our community for the Francophonie. Louis Patry has spent more than 35 years as a volunteer to preserve and promote the history and the heritage of Orléans, with a few of his friends who are here today, many friends. He founded the Mouvement d'Implication Francophone d'Orléans, MIFO, in 1979. Louis and his team of volunteers organized the first few shows in French that were offered by the MIFO in the 80s. As you know, the popular activities organized by MIFO are going on today at the XemK Arts Center, where more than 8,000 tickets were sold last year. In 2008, Louis was one of the founding members of the Société Franco-Ontarienne du Patrimoine et de l'Histoire d'Orléans. In 2011, he created the Committee for the Improvement of the Place of Francophone Names in Orleans that underlines the importance of French names, as well as the acute on the word Orléans.
Local English newspapers now use the accent aigu in Orléans. Il prévoit encore sur une base régulière l'usage des noms commémoratifs en français.
He has been promoting regularly the use of commemorative names in French. More recently, he was responsible for naming the Ron Racette Arena at the Ray Friel Center. Louis has been serving his community over 35 years. He embodies Francophonie in Ottawa and the cultural heritage of Orleans.
To join your councillor, Jody Middick, and your friends, Bob Monette and Stephen Blais, to present you with this meeting's Mayor's City Builder Award. C'est pourquoi je vous remets le prix.
This is why I decided to give you the Mayor's City Builders Award. Thank you so much for your good work and have a good festival. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Maire.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, and the East Awards, Orleans, and others. I'm very grateful for this honor today, and in addition, because it's happening during the Saint Jean-Baptiste celebration. And I'd also like to thank a person that has inspired me very much. Since I moved to Orléans in '79, Nicole Fortier, who is here today, she is president of the SFOFO. She has always been a role model. You can't do otherwise than be motivated by her. There's also my wife, the other Nicole Patry, who is here, who is also a source of inspiration for me. She helps me out quite a bit, and I appreciate it. And finally, I would like to thank you, because all the support that we get from the City of Ottawa is through the Mayor and these councillors, so it helps us to do good work. Thank you.
Alors, félicitations et merci.
Congratulations, and thank you to all the guests and Louis' friends for being here today.
Appel nominal.
Conseiller Manette,
Present.
Councillor Middick,
Present.
Councillor Harder. Here. Councillor Wilkinson,
Present.
Councillor El-Shantiri,
Present.
Councillor Caudry,
Present.
Councillor Taylor,
Here.
Councillor Shirelli,
Here.
Councillor Eglai,
Here.
Councillor Deans,
Here.
Councillor Tierney,
Present.
Conseiller Fleury,
Ici.
Councillor Nussbaum,
Present.
Councillor McKenney,
Present.
Councillor Leeper,
Present.
Councillor Brockington, Councillor Chernyshenko,
Present.
Conseiller Cloutier,
Present.
Conseiller Blais,
Present.
Councillor DeRuse,
Here.
Councillor Moffat,
Here.
Councillor Kakish,
Present.
Councillor Hubley,
Here.
Mayor Watson.
Ici.
Le quorum est 10, Monsieur le maire.
Merci. Confirmation of minutes, adoption de process verbeux pour le 10 juin 2015 for the meeting of June 10th, 2015. Carried. Declaration of interests, including those originally arising from prior meetings. Déclaration de conflit d'intérêt. None. Communications. Councillor Fleury had a quick note on this with respect to geese management strategy.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This just relates to the amended inquiry response that was provided at committee. Unfortunately, it wasn't attached to the document, and I wanted to properly reflect the intents, which are for staff to include in the strategy the review of the population along the Rideau River.
That's duly noted. Thank you. Regrets, Councillor Riley Brockington advised that he will be absent from the council meeting of June 24th, 2015. Le conseiller Brockington a prévenu qu'il sera absent de la réunion de 24 juin 2015. Motion to introduce reports moved by Councillor Chernyshenko, seconded by Councillor El-Shantiri. Councillor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And in honor of Monsieur Patry, I will read this in French, and je vais prononcer les accents aigus et graves et circonflexes. Que le rapport de la Société de portefeuille d'Hydro-Ottawa Incorporée, intitulé Rapport annuel de 2014 de l'actionnaire de la Société de portefeuille d'Hydro-Ottawa Incorporée, le rapport numéro 4 du comité de vérification, le rapport numéro 5 du comité des services communautaires et de protection, le rapport numéro 4 du comité de l'environnement, le rapport numéro 5A du comité des finances et du développement économique, les rapports numéro 8A et 9 du comité de l'urbanisme et le rapport numéro 4 de la commission du transport en commun soient reçus et examinés.
Adopté, carried. Merci. Reports, Hydro Ottawa, we'll come back to that once we finish the consent agenda. We have a presentation. Next is committee reports. Rapport des comités, Audit Committee, report number 4, Comité de vérification. Council received this report. Received. Thank you, Councillor Hubley, for a very thorough look at the waste hotline. Appreciate that. Item number 3, fraud and other similar irregularities policy amendments as presented. Carried. Ottawa Community Housing Corporation mortgage refinancing. Carried. Item number 5, 10-year housing and homelessness plan 2014 update. Councillor Fleury has a motion, so we'll come back to that. Item number 6, submission on the review of Ontario's long-term affordable housing strategy. Councillor Fleury has a item on that as well. We'll come back to that. Item number 7, Ottawa Fire Services 2015 Station Location Study, étude sur l'emplacement des casernes de pompiers de 2015. Carried. Item number 8, Bylaw Review Strategy, Stratégie de révision des règlements municipaux. Carried. Item number 9, Progress on the Sandy Hill Town and Gown Committee. Received. Environment Committee Report number 4, Residential Protective Plumbing Program, Administrative Amendments. Councillor Hubley has asked that we hold that, so we'll come back to that. Item number 11, Green Bin Program in Ottawa Schools, Programme de Bac Vert dans les écoles d'Ottawa. Carried. Thank you for that initiative. Planning Committee Report number 8A, Zoning Bylaw Phase 2 of Low-Rise Infill Housing Study, Modification de Règlement de Zonage. Councillor Harder and Eglai have motions on that, so we'll come back to that. Planning Committee Report number 9, rapport numéro 9 du Comité de l'Urbanisme, Zoning Bylaw Amendment 180 Huntmar Drive, modification au règlement de zonage 180 Promenade Huntmar. Carried. Item number 14, Habitat for Humanity deferral of development charges for 979 Eve Street, 1277 Cousineau Street, and 1279 Cousineau Street. Rapport de redevance d'aménagement d'habitat pour l'humanité pour le 979 rue Yves, le 1277 rue Cousineau et le 1279 rue Cousineau. Carried. Thank you to our partners at Habitat. Revised bulk consent agenda. Councillor Eglai, you have an item you'd like to remove?
Amendment 15 Colonnade Road.
Okay, item number G has been removed. Does anyone else wish to remove anything from the bulk consent agenda? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres choses? No? It was item number G on Colonnade Road North. On the bulk consent agenda as presented, carried. Okay, so we're now here in our capacity as the shareholder for Hydro Ottawa Holdings, Inc. I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome Jim Durrell, who is the chair of Ottawa Hydro, and thank him for service to the community. Mr. Durrell, once again, and Bryce Conrad, the president and CEO, and our representatives on the Hydro board from council are Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Harder. And we thank them for their service. And we have a presentation. I remind members, as we did with the Ottawa Community Housing, this is the shareholders' meeting, and the procedure memo talks about what we can and can't discuss, and we're keeping things to a relatively high level at the shareholders' meeting. So, Mr. Durrell, the floor is yours.
Your Worship and members of Council, bonjour, Monsieur le Maire et les Messieurs et Mesdames les membres de conseils municipaux. C'est un grand plaisir d'être ici ce matin pour vous présenter le rapport annuel de Hydro Ottawa. J'aimerais vous présenter aussi Mr. Bryce Conrad, notre président. I also have with me Norm Fraser, our Chief Operating Officer, and Jeffrey Simpson, our Chief Financial Officer. You've all received the report. I know you've had an opportunity to read it, and so, as His Worship has indicated, I will deal with it at a fairly high level, and if you have a specific question, either Bryce or myself would be more than happy to answer it for you. I would like, and the Mayor has alluded to this, but in years past we have been very fortunate. Hydro Ottawa is a very complex organization, and any member of Council who has ever had the pleasure of serving on our board would bear this out. And previously we had the pleasure of having Councillors Hume and McRae, who served this Council very well in Hydro. And I was thrilled to have Councillor Harder and Councillor Wilkinson join us. I can tell you as members of Council that they have represented you well, they have done their homework, and have been very effective thus far. I missed that, Bryce. What am I supposed to say? Oh, and Councillor Merritt in the old days. Yes, my apologies. This was obviously a very good year for Hydro Ottawa, and we made over $30 million, which was exceeded our budget by a little over $3 million. This resulted obviously in a dividend being paid to the city of a little over $18 million, and in the past couple of years, the total dividend has exceeded $56 million. And every year the question is asked, why pay a dividend? Why don't we reduce our rates? And the bottom line out of that is, first of all, Council does not have to accept the dividend. But the reality is, if you choose not to, the board will thank you graciously. But it has no effect on the rates. We're a very, very heavily regulated industry. And as a result of that, from our operations perspective, we earn all of our money. The rest of the operations are essentially break-even. We earn our money, our return on investment, by capital
expenditures, by investing in infrastructure, and we get a return on a good return, rate of return for those investments. It's out of that return that we actually are able to pay a dividend, and not out of the regulated aspect of it. In the course of the year, we've also, a lot of attention has been paid to the asset privatization that's going on with the public, or with the province. The mayor has been extremely supportive and helpful to us in this regard. I know that Councillors Blais and El Chantiri and Monette and Mitik and all of the rest of you that have been so affected by the Hydro One, Hydro Ottawa issue that still plagues us within our city. Minister Shirelli has also been a tremendous help to us, and a little over a week ago, as a result of the mayor's efforts and the minister's efforts, Bryce and I were able to host a meeting with David Dennison, the chair of Hydro One, and Carmen Machello, the president of Hydro One. And during that meeting, we reviewed a number of options and moving forward that would deal ostensibly with how do we try and even out the situation within the boundaries of the City of Ottawa. In that meeting, we identified a number of options. Those options will now be studied, and I would hope that we would be able to deal with this one way or the other by the month of September. Having said that, we've signed a non-disclosure agreement with Hydro One so that Bryce is able to, with our team, sit down and with Carmine and their team and come back with something that we hope will be relevant for you. I'll turn it over to Bryce now just to deal with some other issues within the report, including our generation business. I can tell you that from a generation perspective, Hydro Ottawa is now the largest municipal private generation company in the province of Ontario, and growing. And the amount of green energy that we're able to produce and cost-effective energy is tremendous. Bryce?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just building on that, building on our position of strength, Hydro Ottawa Holding last year generated in excess of $20 million in net income from our generating assets, which is fantastic. We are hopeful for more to come, hopefully within the weeks and months ahead. We're also working hand in hand with the City of Ottawa to install, hopefully on 8 city locations, solar rooftops. That will be done over the course of the next 3 to 4 months. And finally, before you today, you also have a motion to provide a municipal council resolution to support our application to the Independent Electricity System Office for a new potential solar plant on the Nepean landfill site. So I'd hope we can count on your support for that. Last year, we also completed a transition to monthly billing, which was seamless, and we thank our customers for their patience and diligence in that regard. We continue to communicate as best we can. You saw yesterday with the outages, sometimes the best way of communicating is actually through social media. So we have grown our social media numbers by about 50%. We're still about 400% less than the mayor, but we're striving. Continue to worry about our transition, our workforce. About 40% of our workforce is scheduled to retire within the next 5 years. Fortunately, we have a fantastic program, which is truly the best of breed, with Algonquin College to help us replace those individuals that are leaving, so we'll continue to rely on that. And finally, without belaboring the point, Hydro Ottawa continues to be a company that gives where it lives, whether it be the United Way, where we contributed over $250,000 last year.
Bryce, speak into the mic a little closer.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. $250,000 last year to the United Way, or our support for Christie Lake Kids. Our employees, our workforce are committed to giving where we live, and will continue to do so. And with that, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Bryce. And just to finish off before we ask for any questions, if there are any from members of council, we have submitted our rate application, as all of you know. There's been some obvious attention to this fact. There will be, the process, again, is highly regulated, and there will be many advocates and interveners representing people who want to watch carefully what we're doing.
The whole purpose of the application was ostensibly for us to be able to upgrade our infrastructure, which is critical. And again, something to always remember, in the entire Hydro Ottawa bill, only 18.5% of it is actually what comes from us, and the rest is the distribution, generation, HST, etc. So it's an interesting fact that is often lost on our taxpayers. And with that, Your Worship, I will conclude our presentation and look forward to any questions.
Great, and thank you again for the report. We have a number of members of council who have questions. Again, I remind you of the procedure memo sent out by the clerk and deputy clerk with respect to the limited scope in terms of what they can and cannot direct Hydro to do. For example, as the shareholder council cannot direct services, service levels, and rates. So, Councillor El-Shantiri, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your report, and Bryson. I'm sure you were expecting that question, and we're still looking for an update on a discussion that's taking place between the Ottawa Hydro and Hydro One. And I know this is something, whether how much you can tell us, but I mean, that's something daily our residents are asking us those questions. And unfortunately, we can't attend your meeting to ask you those questions. So we have to take advantage of the opportunity you've been here today to tell us how much you can tell us where this discussion going.
Well, I think it would, anybody that has ever served in public office would be very sympathetic to those representing the people who are paying substantially more for their hydro bill. And I know in discussions with Minister Shirelli, he once used the analogy at a breakfast meeting I had with him that if you blew things up and were to redraw it all over again, we would not be having this discussion today, that all of the hydro facilities within the boundaries of the City of Ottawa would be dealt with by Hydro One. The reality of life is it is what it is, and now it's a complicated issue. It's not just a matter of purchasing from Hydro One those 45,000 homes. There's a lot more involved in it. I can tell you that in discussions that we've had with the mayor and obviously with our senior management, the board is making every effort to try and resolve this situation satisfactorily, not only for the City of Ottawa, but to the satisfaction of Hydro One. And I'm not at liberty to say anything more than that at this time, Councillor. And in the end, this city and the taxpayers of Ottawa are the shareholders of Hydro Ottawa, and anything that we are able to resolve, assuming we can resolve something, would be brought back to the city, obviously, for approval as the shareholders.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. I do understand, you know, we can negotiate in public or in those venue, but nevertheless, we need you to continue acting on our behalf as well, because our residents are asking us to ask you, obviously, and we are in a position where we don't have a lot of information coming from either side, which is fair enough. But as long as we know there's an effort been made by both parties to move forward on that file, and any information you can provide us at any time will be greatly appreciated, so we can share it with our resident. Our resident today, you know, you say Hydro Ottawa is a city-owned utility. It's great. Well, we are residents of Ottawa, and we don't feel owner. We feel like a second class here. So that's an issue really we'd like to continue focus at least to resolve it if it's when. And I don't expect to be debated on this table, but nevertheless we'd like to be able to kept in form. Thank you. Thank you for your effort. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. And I think I can safely say, Mr. Durrell and Mr. Conrad, that the council resolution that we all passed that was put forward by Councillor Blais did act as a catalyst, because right after that we were in discussions with the Minister's office and the Premier's office, and that meeting with the President and the Chairman of the Board took place. So, you know, We're not there yet, but it's at least a signal that they understand what a very important priority this is, that all of our residents be treated the same way. So thank you for those, for all of us really, who supported that resolution. Councillor Chernyshchenko, please.
Thank you very much. As you know, I'm a strong supporter of your conservation initiatives, as well as a shift towards cleaner forms of generation, and it's great to see the leadership that you, in partnership with Energy Ottawa, are taking in that area. So I certainly want to support, will be supporting the motion today to give you the council support for the project out in Nepean, and I think that will be a very significant, not just significant in the actual amount of energy being generated, but one of those big projects in an appropriate location, not taking away valuable farmland, et cetera, that people can actually see and visit, and a striking example of what can be done with renewables. So certainly you'll have my support there. I do have a question. I was fascinated to see in my hydro bill yesterday, maybe I wasn't fascinated to get my hydro bill yesterday, but there was a little slip in there which showed the breakdown of where energy is now coming from, where electricity is now coming from in Ontario, and it is quite striking as coal has been almost completely removed from the mix. Even with that, natural gas has gone down a bit, and renewables and alternative energy has jumped from almost insignificant to now 7%. It may not sound like a lot, but it's a huge leap. That's quite telling to us, and that hydro is working on that. Once was alternative, maybe someday will be considered conventional renewable energy. I'm wondering what, as we see a real desire on behalf of homeowners, businesses, installers, particularly with solar within the Ottawa area, is hydro regularly looking at your own procedures, not to jump over any necessary safety approvals, but are you regularly looking at how you can streamline that process, minimize the paperwork, minimize the cost? Obviously, you've got to recover the costs that you're incurring so that those projects can get their approvals as quickly as is feasible and safe to do so, and with lowest cost to the proponent?
Absolutely. The short answer is absolutely. We are entirely supportive of the renewable portfolio, and to the extent that citizens want to put solar rooftop panels, the cost of those panels have come down dramatically. So you'll likely see more and more of that. And we at Hydro Ottawa are entirely supportive. And it used to be a bit of an anomaly to see one of those houses on your road that had the solar panels. Now they're becoming more and more obvious, and more frequent. So short answer, it's been a learning curve for us as well, and as we learn, we adjust our processes. So I'd hope that we're learning from that exercise, and if there's issues that your constituents are raising with respect to the installation of renewables, then by all means I'm happy to take that offline.
Thank you. Yeah, I have heard from a few installers, and I've communicated it to you and to Roger Marsh and others in my conversations, that on occasion installers are running into what they perceive as, was this really necessary, that engineering standard? And I know the City of Ottawa has its part to play as well in terms of building code standards that naturally we put safety foremost, but beyond that we look for ways to make it easier and more streamlined. So that's really what I'm just encouraging, that particularly talking directly with particularly those installers, because they are the ones that can share with you most directly their experiences, and we can get more done more quickly. Thank you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Councillor Monette.
There's an issue that when I was on the board, and it's still occurring obviously, is recruitment. You mentioned about the aging workforce. Is there anything that you're doing? You have programs at Algonquin College where you're recruiting. Is there anything that you're getting the word out there in the city that if you are looking for a career, look at Ottawa Hydro? I mean, obviously it's a great area to work in, but a lot of people are still not aware that that opportunity will be existing, especially in the next 3 to 5 years when the workforce is retiring. Maybe Bryce, is there anything that you could touch on that?
Thank you, Councilman, for the question. It is, when people ask you as a CEO what keeps you up at night, the question inevitably comes back to me, and I always say it's the looming wave of retirements that will hit us, the tsunami wave. Fortunately, there are three things. I mean, there's multiple things that we're doing. I'll highlight three. One is our partnership with Algonquin College. You cannot find a better partner in this city than Algonquin College for these sorts of activities. They are innovative, responsive. They turn things around on a dime. They are the epitome of a non-bureaucratic institution. For something that large, it's truly amazing how quickly they respond. So, in fact, over the past 5 years, they've doubled the intake of the power line maintainer program. So what started is 24 is now 48. And each one of those kids, and their kids, trust me, is almost guaranteed work, whether it be with Hydro Ottawa or with another utility across the country. But it's a truly fantastic program, and it's the most popular program at Algonquin College. They're way oversubscribed to that program. So that's one success. The second, we've launched last year, 2 years ago, I believe, when you were on the board, Councillor, a retiree engagement strategy, so that we kept those retirees a bit longer. We were able to sort of transfer some of the knowledge of those gentlemen, those women that were walking out the door. As opposed to just walking out the door, we gave them the opportunity to sort of potentially transition in some cases, come back and teach, do some sort of mentoring our employees. And that, thrilled with the success we've had in that regard. And finally, last couple of weeks ago, we had an announcement with the Human Resources Sector Council in this area, with Minister Kelly Leach and the Status of Women and Labour. And if you look at the front cover of our report, you'll see we're making a very significant effort with respect to diversity in hiring women. So the 4 women on the front page of our cover of their annual report are a reflection of some of the great success we've had, and those are 4 women who have fantastic careers ahead of them at Hydro Ottawa, and we're looking to continue to take that one step forward.
Thank you. Just a comment also from what Councillor El Chantiri was saying. Yes, it is important that dialogue is continuing with the province. I'm very pleased that the Premier is open to having that dialogue, and obviously we're going in the right direction. It's been something that it's not overnight that we've talked about this issue. I mean, 3 mayors have spoken about amalgamating the service. Mayor Sorelli at the time, Mayor O'Brien, and Mayor Watson, and now we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And thank you for taking that role, and hopefully within this term of council, we'll have some good news down the road. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Blais, you were on the list, I think, and you removed yourself.
Yes. I'll ask a quick question. Sorry, just going back to Councillor Turnashenko's question on renewables and the solar program. As a homeowner, if I want to put panels on my roof and I come to Hydro Ottawa, do you have a program to facilitate or help me with that, or how does that work?
Well, there's multiple steps. I mean, theoretically, I think the largest rationale for people putting solar panels on their roof is because they're looking for the financial incentive that goes along with it. That financial incentive has come down dramatically from the old days under the Ontario Power Authority. It's still there today. Microfit applications are still being received, but the level of remuneration has dropped considerably. So, yeah, if a constituent of yours wanted to install solar panels, that's one way. There would be an application made through to the Independent Electricity System Office for that, microfit application. We would help support that.
Okay, so you help with the paperwork? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's
what about the financing?
The financing?
Yeah.
We don't do financing.
Okay.
So that is potentially an obstacle, although I would suggest, given the decrease in price, the value of the home itself, I mean, it's an easy thing to sort of throw on a line of credit attached to your house, if you will. Sure. We're not into the business of financing at this point in time.
Have you, or would you consider getting into that business, I guess, would be where I'm going.
The chair is saying no beside me. So the answer would be no.
Sure.
I think you'll see some additional incentive programs coming out under the next wave of conservation first, and to the extent I don't believe people are not installing solar panels because they don't have access to financing. I think there are other reasons they're not doing it.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. So with that, we're being asked that Council receive the audited consolidated financial statements, appoint Ernst & Young as the auditors, approve the recommendation of the nominating committee, approve the independent electricity system operator prescribed templates, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign a written resolution on behalf of the City of Ottawa as shareholders. Is that received and carried? Received? Perfect. Thank you. Next item is the 10-year Housing and Homelessness Plan 2014 update that was held. Councillor Fleury has a motion on this item.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I want to bring context to this. This should have been dealt at committee. Unfortunately, I had to leave for personal reasons. This relates to the plan that we've approved and that has gotten a wide sector buy-in in terms of the direction to lower the amount of shelter use and really increase the amount of housing and supports that are available for at-risk residents in our community. To give you a bit of context, the province capped the amount that we're giving to emergency shelters in 2012 dollars at around $24 million. And since then, as you know, we won't leave any client at risk or not fund the agencies for the service. So and the motion speaks of that figure of about $1.5 million that was supplemented last year. So all I'm asking is, in line with the 10-year homelessness plan, that we sit down and plan out if those operational pressures can be targeted towards a faster implementation of this plan, and that means really focusing our efforts on the housing and the supports. So I'll read the therefore be it resolved. It is in front of us, but it is that City Council directs staff to work with Council members sponsors group prior to consideration of the 2016 budget on identifying the issues that City faces in making progress towards reducing and ultimately eliminating the $1.5 million provincial funding shortfall for emergency shelters over the short, medium, and long term to support ending chronic homelessness by 2018 in keeping with the 10-year homelessness plan, and at the City Clerk's office be directed to ask members of Council for their interest in participating in the group.
Okay. Councillor Beans, please. Okay, on a point of order, Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Your Worship. Since this is just coming to us at the meeting, I need to ask whether this would result in more city money going to shelters or less city money going to shelters, because if it does, I have to declare an interest.
So, Mr. O'Connor.
Turn.
Dr. Burry.
I don't know that the motion specifically would result in that outcome. We have a 10-year plan that's approved, and that 10-year plan, we are on track with that plan and would see reduction in shelter costs over time.
So if you're at all concerned, I would suggest you step away from the table because it's dealing with shelters and the future of shelters.
Yeah, the question is whether money goes to shelter, whether additional money could go to shelters.
Yeah.
And this motion the motion appears to say something slightly different than what Councillor Fleury was saying. So I'm not, because this appears to create a sponsor group.
Yes.
And doesn't necessarily move any money anywhere.
At this point, no.
Yeah. So
it's your decision whether you feel you'd
well, in that case, there is no interest, so I can continue.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks.
Councillor Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I think we all support the goal of ending chronic homelessness in the City of Ottawa. I do have some concerns with the way the motion is written. I just in the therefore be it resolved, there's a part that says that we want to eliminate the $1.5 million provincial funding shortfall for emergency shelters. I'm not sure that's a fair characterization of the provincial funding formula. So, Mr. Bray, just wanted to ask you if you would agree that there is a provincial funding shortfall.
Based on how the funding formula is based for the city, we now receive a flat line $35 million, and it's up to us to actually determine the priorities. So there isn't actually, we don't receive a specific amount of money for sheltering any longer.
So it's not reasonable to say there's a provincial funding shortfall?
Not according to the province, no.
No. Okay. So then just wondering if you can tell us, Mr. Burry, how this motion differs from the goals that we've outlined in the 10-year housing and homelessness plan.
So basically the goals of the 10-year plan are to reduce the use of chronic shelters. And it is very consistent. We have started to make some progress in that area, and we will make progress over this term of council as our capital investments start to build the types of supportive housing that we need to reduce chronic homelessness. We will move in the next coming months another 30 to 40 people out of shelters into those supportive housing as they're constructed. The timing of that construction is not totally within our control. All of those projects are online and will be brought out during the term.
Okay, so it says in the motion that it says for emergency shelter services over the short, medium, long term to support ending chronic homelessness by 2018. So right now we have a 10-year housing and homelessness plan with the goal of ending chronic homelessness, but we're in year 1 or 2?
We're about a year and a half into the plan now.
Year and a half into the 10-year plan. So this would be effectively accelerating the plan by 6.5 years?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, I just want to be clear that what we're really doing here is we're accelerating the housing and homelessness plan from a 10-year plan to a 4-year plan. And I think it's fair to say you can't accelerate a plan like this without money. So just to be clear that this is a big budget ask if we go down this road, because that's what we're really saying is that we want, this is a priority for us, it's a strategic goal. We want to accelerate it from 10 years to 4 years.
A point of order, Councillor Shirelli.
Okay, Your Worship, since this is now discussing significant additional money going to shelters, I am going to declare interest. And the interest is that my daughter has a part-time job with Shepherds of Good Hope.
Okay, thank you. Duly noted. Councillor Deans.
So, Mr. Burry, how many, we have 6,500 people in shelters currently?
Yes, approximately that many.
Would it be possible, even if, tell us how it would be possible to accelerate this plan to end chronic homelessness in the City of Ottawa by 2018?
We have to have significant capital investment in order to build the supportive housing that we would need.
And how much capital investment are we talking about?
If you take what we have over this particular term, you would need to, multiplying it by 2, you need 2.5 times at least the amount of money that we currently have, because the 10-year plan was based on the current level of investment that is coming in from the federal and provincial governments.
Okay. So, I mean, we all support the goal. The goal is a lofty goal. It's a good goal, but I think we have to keep it real, too. And I just don't know if creating a council-sponsor group to do what we're already doing, where we already have a plan that's on track, makes the most sense. And what I'm detecting here is a bit of a knowledge gap around the table in terms of our housing and homelessness strategy and plan and goals. And so I'm wondering, and maybe as the chair of the CPS committee could give direction for you to organize a housing primer, sort of a housing 101 for members of council and staff, so that when we're coming into budget in the fall, at least we all are on the same page in terms of our knowledge of this issue, so that we can make informed decisions about budgets coming into. I think that might be a better idea. I know there's a time sensitivity around this motion, but I almost feel that it should be sent back to the committee for a real discussion about what we can do, because I think we have to keep it real. Thank you.
Just a reminder to members, the primary purpose of the resolution is to establish a council member sponsor group to have this discussion, because I think one of the goals certainly that we all strive to achieve is that we want fewer people in shelters and more people in housing, obviously, and the shelter system has become too large a stopgap problem where people are living longer periods of time, according to the Alliance to End Homelessness, and it's becoming their de facto permanent residence, which is not healthy for the individual and for the system. So I think the key thing to remember is that this is, as we've done in other challenges we face, we've created these sponsors groups to have that dialogue. There's no, certainly I'm not supporting any jumping the queue in terms of dollars, but I do support us having that discussion because I think from a public policy point of view it makes sense. So thank you, Councillor Deans. Councillor Leeper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am wondering what the output of these sponsor group is. What is the interface with the CPSC committee? What kind of report does it come out with? Does it make recommendations? If I could just get some clarity around what the final deliverable is, please.
I think the clerk or deputy clerk can answer, but the clerk traditionally would go and circulate members asking for their interest, and then obviously there may be some people above and beyond who sit on CPS that might sit on it, but by and large I suspect it's a number of the people on CPS. But is that correct, Mr. Clerk?
That is correct, Mr. Mayor, and then ultimately the sponsorship group would determine how best to convey their results to the committee, which might be an information previously distributed or it could in fact be a report.
So it'd go back to CPS.
Potentially with recommendations?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
That's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Leeper. Councillor McKenney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Happy to speak to this. Obviously, I am always encouraged by and happy to work on anything that reduces housing and homelessness. And I think that it is something that we need to give a very close and detailed look at. We've got a 10-year housing and homelessness plan. It's a good plan, and I was going back through it yesterday, and if we actually do everything in that plan, we will work towards our goal of reducing housing and homelessness. My concern with the beginning of this process in terms of taking folks out of shelters, which we need to do, and putting them in supportive housing, so either building supportive housing ourselves or having those supports for folks who come out of shelters, especially those, and many of them are, if they're chronic, have mental health issues. And, the difficult part with housing first as we approach it is that we are essentially taking people out of shelters, putting them in housing, but right now we actually don't have all of the supports necessary to support them. We see it in our OCH buildings. I get calls in my office almost daily, and I'm often in the very unfortunate circumstance of asking OCH staff to look at mentally ill people and possibly redirecting them back into shelters. But they destabilize buildings. They destabilize certain floors on buildings. It is very, very evident when we have only taken someone out of a shelter, put them into housing, and don't have all of the necessary supports to wrap around them. I know we do our best, but until we start reducing the money that we put into the shelter system, until we start pulling that back and we're really able to reinvest in what are supports that are really needed for people who have mental illness, it doesn't work. So my concern with today's motion is the dates, obviously, and the issue of the $1.5 million provincial funding shortfall. I think that I would be
I would be happy to see it go back to committee so that we understand exactly what we're looking at. I'm certainly not opposed to a member sponsors group. I think that, I commend my colleague for that. But at this point, I would support it going back to committee so that we can understand exactly what it is that we're going to do here without any additional funding. So I think it's important to note that we're not asking for funding. So I'd just like to ask you, Mr. Beery, what that would look like if we didn't have any dates attached to it, any monies attached to it. What do you think could come out of this?
Well, I think one of the things that could come out is a little better understanding of the 10-year plan and the fact that exactly what you've outlined is what will begin to happen. We're just the first year in terms of, and I recognize for many years, individuals came out of shelters, were put into accommodations, and there's a boomerang back into the shelter system destabilization. That is not what we'll be doing going forward. The issue is to have those individuals placed with the support so that we don't have that. Same thing we're doing in terms of the family first approach. We've had issues around families going in and out of shelters because they haven't been stable in the housing that they've been placed into. Much of our issues and I think this is a good thing in terms of the discussions around this, many of our pressure in the shelter system are actually with long-stay families. We've made tremendous progress in all of the other areas. The area where we're having difficulty and continued is long-stay families because, again, we need to invest more in housing that they can move into. The issue is the affordability of that housing for them. I think just understanding those basic things at the committee level would then help to see where the 10-year plan is on track, where the investments are, what we're proposing to do, and understand where the potential delays are, particularly in the areas if we have housing projects that are delayed due to OMB reviews and other issues that are occurring.
Okay, so thank you for that then. Is it, I think that I would support this if we could perhaps send it back to committee and have that discussion and make sure that we're not continuing just to redirect from the shelter. My absolute concern is a simple redirection from shelters into our housing stock without the supports.
So I think, Councillor, the mover of the motion, I understand, is willing to take out the words by 2018. Right. So I think it deals with the issues that you just raised and Councillor Deans as well. So I just wanted to let you know that because it should be up on the screen now. So thank you for that. Councillor Blais, I think, has asked that his name be taken off. Councillor Hubley is next, please.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to go back to Councillor Dean's question and ask Mr. Burry for a clarification. I believe Councillor Deans was asking if, in fact, because in this motion it talks about a 1.5 million download or shortfall. Your reply, if I understood it correctly, was not according to the province. I want to know according to the city. Are we short 1.5 and is it short funding from the province or not?
We receive an envelope of $35 million that essentially covers both the sheltering costs, dom house costs, others associated with it. We are at the present time, and we're no longer at 1.5 million. That is actually coming down because what we're seeing is that was a 2014 number. In 2015, we're on track somewhere around 850,000, and next year we expect that to start going down because, again, the investments that we're making in housing and creating those options in order to divert it. As I mentioned earlier, the area where we're still having some challenges is with respect to family sheltering. Families are staying longer in the shelters this year versus last year because we do not have the affordable options that they can move into. That will come as we continue to invest in things like rent supplements, creating the housing, all those things that come through year over year with the plan help to address those issues, and that's why we see this over the 10 years continuing to decline.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Mayor, I wonder why we want to do this as a subcommittee of CPS and why we wouldn't open it up to all members of council so that we could start having a dialogue about perhaps we don't have to build these supportive housings ourselves. They could be P3s. We could ask for help for existing housing stock so that we could move these families into housing much quicker. would you be open to, or would the mover be open to adding this sponsor group not being a subgroup of the members of CPS, but actually all of council?
I think, Councillor, just to clarify, because I think you might have been not at your seat at the time, but the clerk did indicate that he's going to canvass all members, not just CPS members, so you're more than welcome to...
okay.
So
thank you very much.
Thank you for that point. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and to my colleague Councillor Hubely's point, I think it would be wonderful to have a broader group of councillors on the sponsors group to provide that wider kind of perspective. Just to Councillor McKenney's point about supports, and I think that's part of I agreed to second this motion because I don't see this as being an effort to accelerate the plan so much as I do about optimizing the results that we're going to get out of the plan. It's not just about reducing the number of chronically homeless people, but increasing the success rates of what we're doing and what we can do. I've had the opportunity over the last several months to participate in AMO's Affordable Housing Task Force, and I can tell you that there are some unique opportunities that are being realized not just across Ontario and Canada, but across North America. There are tools that we don't have yet in our toolbox because traditionally they haven't been there, and I think they bear out exploring those things. I certainly commend Councillor Dean's committee for keeping their foot on the gas on this. But I think it's one of those pressures that if we don't keep both eyes focused on it, it's like you never turn your back to the ocean. Homelessness, and particularly chronic homelessness, can overtake a city very quickly. And so I think the opportunity to get a group of councillors together focused and seized on this issue can be nothing but good in terms of trying to make sure that we have all of the tools at our disposal and that we're taking advantage of all of the weapons in our arsenal to try and combat this problem. I know that we have a very good relationship with the Alliance to End Homelessness, and certainly treasure that. We work quite well with them. But Councillor Fleury's motion mentions sector partners as well. I mean, many of these sector partners roll up into being members of the Alliance, but no, I think there are other ways in which we can work with them more collaboratively and bring the sector closer together so that it functions more as a unit rather than individual kind of shelters and business units that all have their own mandates, missions, and goals. If our true goal as a collective is to reduce the number of chronic homelessness on our streets, to yield a more prosperous capital city, not just for our residents, not just for the sake of having the numbers, but it makes us healthier, makes us more economically advantaged, and increases the prosperity of our city, I think we should do it. So I don't see this motion as being contrary to anything that we've done thus far. I think it gives us the opportunity to accelerate what we've done, but again, not with respect necessarily to time, but to outcomes. So I think we should take every opportunity to do that, and I think it would be received well by those folks in our city who are also seized with this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank Councillor Hubely. He asked the question I was going to ask in terms of clarifying the $1.5 million shortfall, whether you're talking as a provincial agency or as you're talking as a city. So thank you also, Mr. Burry, for clarifying that for us. I'm going to echo what both Councillor Hubely and Councillor Taylor have said. Everybody around this table for a long time has acknowledged that this is a problem. And our traditional ways of fixing it have not got us to a resolution of this problem. So if we can bring more people to the table, if we can have more engaged discussions, and as Councillor Taylor said, put more tools in our toolbox, then I say bring it on and let's do it. Let's have that discussion and bring as many engaged and interested parties to the table as possible. So I'll absolutely be supporting this motion.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the important thing here is getting lost a little bit in the shuffle about concerned about future budgets and things, and whether we try to get it ending earlier or later. So I think the point of it is, it's a 10-year plan. We should work within the 10-year plan framework, but we would hope at the end of the 10 years we don't have to do very much because we've already got a lot done. I think we should focus on the one is to set a group of councillors who look at things, because we get the day-to-day contact on the issues. It's a little bit different group than the broader stream of all the providers who look at it from a different point of view, to see what we can come up with ideas and things to make things better. So I think that's what Councillor Fleury was trying to do, was to get that group together. And I think that's a really good thing, that we work on that. We all become more familiar with the needs then. Having been in Ottawa community housing for a couple of years and worked with co-ops and things, I know the needs are a little different in the different sectors, but the totality of it is in that plan. And I think that's roughly what some of the other councillors are saying. So I would actually like to take out the part prior to consideration of the draft 2016 budget, simply to, it's not the budget item we're talking about, as it may end up being that way, but to start with, it's a group of concerned councillors that would get together and work on different things. As Councillor Hubley says, it may not always be city money. It could be any other types of thing doing, but the whole objective is to end chronic homelessness. The whole objective is that people have housing when they need it, and we have to obviously stay within our budget. So in trying to do it by I don't think we need to do it by 2018. If we can, it'd be marvelous. But we have to be working and getting that down. So I think that maybe I'm going to ask the mover of the motion, Councillor Fleury, if we took out the point which talks about budget from that, does that take away from what you're trying to do with this motion?
So we'll let Councillor Fleury deal with that when he's wrapping up. So do you have anything else,
I'll let him do the
Wilkinson?
change if that's the case, because I think it would make it more. I think people are getting tied up that it has budget in it. It doesn't actually directly say that, and we want to make sure
I think it's just giving
clear.
it as a time frame.
Well, and the time frame. Well, I think the time frame needs to be at the moment I'm reading that. I don't see the time frame in the motion. Doesn't say it's going to be any earlier. It says to try. It says it tries to make to speed up things, but that's just.
I think the councillor would be willing to put in prior to the third quarter of 2016, or third quarter of 2015.
This would be just a report. It's a report coming back that we'll be looking at, as opposed to anything else.
Are you okay with that wording?
I'm okay with that. I think the key is we should be talking about this and doing things about it, but we don't want to lock our hands into budgets.
Okay, so prior to the end of Q3, 2015. Is that acceptable, Councillor Wilkinson?
Yeah, I think it would be. I don't know if we even need a time frame in there. I think it takes as long as it takes us to do the job is really what matters.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Councillor Nussbaum?
I think my intervention isn't necessary, because I was going to make a suggestion, which I think Councillor Wilkinson has captured, that this open-ended group report to the September CPS meeting, and then the CPS can take over from there. The point is, there isn't a CPS meeting between now and the end of September, from what I understand, so there is a bit of a window here for some additional work. But I do think that CPS should take over the work when it reconvenes in September, and I think that's consistent with what Councillor Wilkinson has put forward. Thank you.
Okay. So, Councillor Fleury, to wrap up.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Yes, I want to thank members of council for engaging on this, and I must apologize. This is a conversation that I should have had at committee. Unfortunately, again, for personal reason, I had to leave. All I'm looking for is for us to have a sponsors group looking into the issue. All of the elements that are attached to it, the amounts, I just use them to bring fact to why I thought that was important, and I'm looking for your support just to have that sponsors group, and really would appreciate those efforts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So on the motion, carried? Carried, thank you. All right, the next item is submission on the review of Ontario's long-term affordable housing strategy. Yes, received as amended, correct. The submission, I just wanted to give a compliment to Dr. Burry and Janice Burrell. We have, for members of council's benefit, it's my understanding that AMO, our Association of Municipalities of Ontario, has been very complimentary towards our particular submission, and in fact have taken large sections of our submission to include in their submission to the province. So imitation is the greatest form of flattery, and I think we're very well served by Janice Burrell and her team in the housing branch, who have really been stick-handling this process for a long time. So I just wanted to, before we ask Councillor Fleury to introduce his motion, to thank the staff publicly for a job well done, because when AMO is looking to us in a leadership role, I think that's something we can all be very proud of. So, Councillor Fleury, please. You have an amendment. It's before.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I want to répliquer. I want to agree with you on the statements regarding Janice Burrell and Aaron's team. This one relates to just minor amendments supported by staff and written by staff on point number 4 of our submission. Instead of speaking of best practices and innovative measures as a whole, it really specify the innovations and best practices that we are looking to target, and it really speaks of the issues we have towards treatment and addiction. So I'll read the therefore be it resolved, if you don't mind. The City of Ottawa number 4 recommendation submission to the Ontario Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing should be amended to include priority funding be given to evidence-based housing initiatives to address the needs of people with drugs and or alcohol addictions, with an aim to coordinate provincial funding streams in the Health and Social Services Ministry and or other applicable ministries to reduce the system pressures, specifically at the emergency shelter, and address housing challenges for those with drugs or alcohol addictions, as well as those facing mental health challenges.
I think it should say plural shelters, if I'm not mistaken, because you're not specifically dealing with one shelter, so it's plural. So on the motion, the amendment carried. On the main report as amended, carried. Thank you very much. Our next item is taken off the consent from Councillor Hubley, Residential Protective Plumbing Program. Councillor Hubley, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll wait for Mr. Weir to get to the chair. I want to thank staff for reviewing this very important program that I highly recommend. But for the benefit of my fellow councillors, I asked Dixon and his staff to look at this program over a year ago, because we started getting reports of companies charging the max for each of these applications without any variance. It was always trying to get the most money out of the city. So we wanted to take a look at that and see what the case was. So I appreciate that your report has come back, and I applaud the recommendation that we go to multiple quotes, which will ensure the taxpayers are getting more value for their dollars. But I'd like to know, because I didn't see anything in here about whether we're going to go back over the existing cases that have been filed to ensure there was no misuse of tax dollars or any fraud involved, or are we just going to tighten this up for future applications?
Mayor, through you to the councillor, at this point the plan is to move forward with the changes here and realize the benefits of the improved competitive pricing that we've already seen, and then carry out a more comprehensive program review to come forward to council in Q4 of this year, looking at the entire program. That I expect will be will be a forward-looking review, as opposed to an audit, if you will, or a rear-looking review.
I noticed the comments in there that there may be delays or added burden to getting the multiple quotes, but is it not, in fact, the case that since this program has taken off and been quite popular, like for the residents of, Councillor El-Shatiri's ward, Councillor Caudry's ward, and Wilkinson and myself, our wards were deeply affected in 2009, and these cases of flooding go across the city, basically. there's been quite an uptake to this program. Hasn't it been the case that there's now more companies involved in providing this service and therefore not as burdensome to get more quotes and to get the job done as quickly as possible?
Again, through the Mayor to the Councillor, I think, yes, actually, moving to this 3 quotes right off the mark will accelerate the delivery of the program. I think the previous route, which was to get one and then possibly have to go back out again, is confusing and slows the entire process. I think making it clear from the initial outset that 3 quotes will be provided will in fact accelerate and improve the delivery of the protective plumbing and its installation.
And finally, will you be, I didn't see anything in here, but I'm hoping that you're going to do some sort of random check system or some risk analysis here so that you can do some random checking of the quotes that come in or the completed jobs to make sure that we're getting maximum value?
Again, through the Mayor to the Councillor, we did implement a auditing program, random check program, working closely with Building Code Services last year, and it proved to be very effective. And the intent with the program review will be to come forward with a recommendation on auditing going forward.
Thank you. And again, thank you for helping out our residents in their time of need. I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you, Councillor. Appreciate that. On the report is presented. Carried. Adopté. Merci. The next item that's been held is Planning Committee Report number 8A, Zoning Bylaw Amendment Phase 2 of Low-Rise Infill Housing Study Modifications. Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney. The Chair and Vice Chair have a motion, as does Councillor Egli, seconded by Councillor Cloutier, and Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor Harder, and Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney. And I believe that's it. So we'll go to Councillor Harder to introduce her motion, which will be up on the screen momentarily. Councillor Harder, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Did you want me to introduce the item as well?
If you could, please.
Sure. So Infill 2 is a package of changes to the city's zoning bylaw that will ensure that new low-rise residential development is compatible with our neighborhoods inside the Greenbelt. And Ottawa is leading Canada in preserving neighborhood character by tweaking our development rules to keep the scale of new houses reasonable while still allowing residents and developers to build their property. Infill 2 will ensure that rear yards are retained and limit the size of houses on large lots. The rules limit projections built on houses and rooftop patios, as well as the size of accessory buildings, to protect neighbors' privacy. This Infill 2 project has seen exhaustive public consultation. There were 3 public workshops and 5 public information sessions. There was a lot of outreach to residents and industry. There were dozens of delegations or written submissions when the report was at Planning Committee. The submissions and motions from the May 26th committee were referred to staff for analysis and review. A memo from Mr. Michael Mizzi outlined the recommendations for change, and we have a comprehensive motion that incorporates the changes that are supportable by staff, having done that review. And let's face it, not everyone is going to be happy, but planning staff have achieved a reasonable balance between what community residents and community associations and developers are asking for. We also have a 2-year monitoring plan. I think that that's critical that everyone remembers that. Currently staff, I was speaking with Mr. Alain Miguelis yesterday, and he was saying that they're currently working out how the monitoring format is going to work. They're going to report back to Planning Committee on what that looks like whenever it's ready. I don't know if it's informally, if it's ready for the next Planning Committee. Whenever that is, they'll report back to it. But that's very different. So they're going to be making sure that the new rules are applied to various building projects and whether there are any problems or inconsistencies. And if there are, adjustments to the zoning bylaw can be made if they find that it's necessary. So all in all, Mr. Acting Mayor, or Mr. Deputy Mayor, sorry, this has been a very large project, one that we're very proud of, and staff have done an amazing amount of work on it, and so has the communities. and the individual residents and the developers. It's been collaborative. You know, one of the things that Ms. Sneddon said at the beginning is, wait a minute. You're not going to be doing your thing over there while these people over there. Let's get you in the same room and have that discussion. And I think that that was the start of a really good future. So I will introduce my first motion now, is the one that comes from the review and from the report. It's before you. I don't know, Mr. Acting Mayor, how much you want me to read, or whether just the... no, we don't want me to read the whole thing.
You're not asking to read it.
So what it does is it deals with the various aspects that we approve minor wording and other modifications to document 1. And a lot of it is the same kind of wording. It just shows up in different places. Like you'll see the word existing, by adding the word existing before average grade. That's one that's in several places. Not exceed a total area of 7 square meters per. Not exceed 2.7 meters in height. So it deals with what the staff was able to reconsider through all the applications, and it deals with the height. It deals with the apertures, the openings on the roofs. It maintains the integrity of the backyards, which was very important. It completes the infill 1, and so this is what this is. Does anybody need me to read it all out?
No, ma'am.
Good. So that's the first motion. So is the motion up on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so maybe you could roll it too for the people in the audience.
Councillor Turnushenko.
Thank you. If we are directly into questions now of staff? Okay.
No.
No?
No.
Didn't think so.
This is for introducing the motions.
Yeah. No, my questions are when we come to
Right.
questions of staff.
So I think the next one is Councillor Eglai.
Yep.
Councillor Eglai has the next one.
Councillor Eglai.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor. So I also will have some questions for staff, but I'll save those for later. So this motion that myself and Councillor Cloutier are bringing rises out of potential issues in and around corner lot subdivisions and the ability of applicants to go to the Committee of Adjustment for variation applications. So essentially what it does is it directs staff in those circumstances where distinctive trees may be at risk. It directs staff in those circumstances to make sure that the Committee of Adjustment planners consider the negative impact of a corner lot severance where such variances are being sought at the Committee of Adjustment, and to take that into account when deciding how we're going to respond, or more importantly, how we're going to object to those variance applications, and also that this particular issue of distinctive trees on corner lot subdivisions be further investigated as part of the city's upcoming urban forest management plan project. So that in a nutshell is what the motion does. As I said, I'll put myself on the speaker's list for some questions to staff directly on the larger report, but that's what the motion intends to do. And I think Councillor Cloutier and I would both really appreciate your support on this, and I want to thank in particular John Smith, who helped us come to this resolution of how to address this particularly vexing problems in some of our wards. So thank you for that, Mr. Smith.
Thank you. Councillor Fleury, motion number 3.
Oui, merci. Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor, or Deputy Mayor.
By community members at times, they were very well responded by staff in terms of the review, and as well as components that were considered within the review. Unfortunately, this can't resolve every planning issue, and some of them are already in the planning department's ward plan. So this one is really to make sure that we look at the risk of land consolidation through that process. So it's a short motion. I'll read it quickly. Phase 2 of the low-rise infill housing study seeks to ensure proper integration of infill housing, including the use of low-rise apartment building, whereas the R4, M, P, and S and T subzones allow for additional height to accommodate the low-rise apartment building, and whereas staff have committed to undertake the review of the R4 zone, where Phase 2 of the low-rise infill housing study does not address the manner through which to properly address added density that may result from the land consolidation. Therefore, be it resolved that staff evaluate the effects of added density within the R4 zone and how to properly integrate the low-rise apartment building in the R4, M, P, S, and T subzones.
Thank you, Councillor Fleury. Councillor Harder, motion number 4.
Okay, thank you. This is moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Whereas the Planning Committee at its meeting of May 26, 2015, heard from public delegations dealing with report reference ACS 2015-PAI-PGM-0039 on Phase 2 of the infill study, Infill 2. Whereas the Planning Committee deferred Council consideration of the report to June 24, 2015, and whereas the amending bylaw will be adopted at the subsequent Council of July 8, 2015. Therefore, be it resolved that Council approve that the transitional dates in the bylaw for Phase 2 of the infill study be based upon an enactment date of July 8, 2015.
Thank you, Councillor Harder. Now we'll go to the speakers for any of the motions. Councillor Chernyshenko.
Thank you very much. As I know staff and the chair will know, I've got a line of questioning that we've continued to go back and forth over the last few weeks on which, and I should start here by saying, first of all, I do want to thank staff who worked for very long and hard on this process, who made themselves available to come out to meetings and follow-up meetings at community associations to walk through, explain, answer questions as best they could. So in a sense, that's all the more disappointing, perhaps regretful, that I am here now with one area that I still consider unresolved out of this process, and that's really in the R3 zones. There were other issues that we might have liked resolved a little differently, but this is one particular one in the R3 zones, which do constitute a significant part of, particularly in Old Ottawa East and Old Ottawa South. That zoning, combined with the fact that the existing neighborhood is not typically built to the height that the zoning allows, means that when we are seeing infill built to the 11 meters currently allowed, it is shocking to the eye, especially if they're taking full advantage of the mass of the buildings and going with the flat roof. We did see pictures at Planning Committee that showed quite starkly the difference between existing versus new. Where we really come to today is with the ability to build triplexes as high as 11 meters, and the community had hoped to be able to push that down to 10 meters, had independent opinions, calculations demonstrating that a triplex could still be built to building code, safety requirements, etc., to a decent roof height, a quality building at 10 meters, particularly when you consider that a basement apartment, a 4-story, where a basement apartment is no longer allowed. The rationale for having the 11 meters is no longer there, and at 10 meters it would make a significant difference. So I would like to understand, as I know my constituents would, why staff have continued to argue that the 11 meters is necessary and that 10 is not supported.
Through you, Your Worship, staff did take a serious look at the request by your community councillor and several others to have a look at lowering the heights that we have in the zoning bylaw for triplexes to 10 meters. And through all the consultation with the working groups, as well as our internal consultation with our building code staff colleagues, we still are of the view that what we're providing is for the ability to have good livable spaces in each of the independent floors that constitute independent dwelling units, as well as provide for the necessary separation between floors for fire separation and noise attenuation. And in terms of how we are proposing to introduce new massing controls for such buildings where they are permitted, I think the thing that is most significant in terms of change is that the rear yard will now be related to the height of the building.
That is certainly a related point, that if someone wants to, well, that calculation means that you can't build higher without effectively adding on to the size of the yard, which is frequently not possible. But what then of the cases of yards where there is already a sufficient sort of matching backyard? Am I right then that if the backyard is large enough, then building to the full 11 meters will be fully possible and allowed?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, that's correct, Councillor.
So that's interesting, where the rear yard appears to, perhaps it doesn't seem out of sorts that with a large rear yard that building a taller building wouldn't be an issue, but it's when buildings are cheek by jowl, side by side on a street, typical in some of our neighborhoods, where seeing those 11 meters built is still a visual problem, a change of character. What then of this issue of the basement apartment, then, finding that we're actually getting, call them illegal, call them not, no longer approved, basement apartments on top of that? What are our tools to prevent that? Because we're seeing them happen, not exaggerating too much, say illicitly, sneaked in, make it one thing, and then turn it into an apartment later. What tools are there to prevent that?
Through you, Your Worship, if they're not allowed in the zoning, they're simply not allowed in the zoning. And that doesn't mean that a triplex can't have a basement for storage, that the lower unit can't be a good larger unit with storage space in the basement, or that the basement can serve as common storage space for the rest of the building. If a triplex is permitted, we want to focus on making sure that we get a good triplex, which offers good living conditions for its residents as well.
My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, though, is people are building that basement tall enough and with the attributes to be able to turn it into an apartment. They are building it and saying it will be part of the main building, or perhaps the first floor unit, but then convert it a year later. It seems to me that is still possible.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, through the bylaw change last year on converted dwellings, we have made that now not permitted in the R3 zone. So even though you can build it, you're not able to do it. It would trigger an application, and that application would be met with comments from the department to say that it's not permitted and it's not consistent with the spirit and intent of the zoning bylaw.
What then do we do with those who simply do it and get away with it, and how do we enforce? Do we actually have those dismantled? It wouldn't be the right word, but unconverted. Does that ever happen?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I mean, when somebody files for a building permit, we expect that they disclose truthfully what their plans are, and we issue a building permit on that basis. We expect that the zoning bylaw is followed, and if there's a zoning violation, that we follow up and enforce on the basis of the zoning violation. Now, in respect to getting to the height of 11 meters, I know that there's been a lot of detailed commentary going back and forth. The information that we have from our colleagues at Building Code Services is that within that 11 meters, you wouldn't necessarily get all that much of a tall basement, if you will, or a basement that is off the ground. You would have probably your typical 1 meter off the ground for what protrudes of the basement, and then 3 stories above. So that would be more or less consistent with a form of building where the basement is storage. I know that in other zones, in the R4 zone, where you're able to have 4 units, it's possible to have window wells. So there's a number of different configurations that you can give to a building, but the zoning in an R3 zone only allows up to 3 units.
I'll try and ask 2 more quick questions within my 38 seconds then. I have chosen not to bring forward a motion at this point, canvassing my colleagues, seeing where we are, not wanting to delay this process. What can be done at this point then through monitoring? I know that isn't fully fleshed out, but what are you anticipating monitoring to see whether we are continuing to see this the inappropriate heights incompatible with their neighboring buildings?
Committee Chair Harder has indicated we will be producing a framework for the monitoring period, and part of that framework will involve having consultation on the lists of issues that are monitored. We can advise that we've done a quick review of other municipalities and how they deal with triplex buildings. I can say that Ottawa is sort of on the lower end of the building height. In the City of Toronto, a triplex can go up to 12 meters. In the City of Montreal, they talk about a maximum number of stories, but not, they only have a minimum height in meters. We can continue to look at this, but again, I mean, if in a zone a triplex is a permitted use, then we certainly want the zoning to reflect a reasonable ability to develop a triplex, all things being equal.
Thank you. So I do remain disappointed that we weren't able to establish a 10-meter maximum height. I think it would have been appropriate in these particular neighborhoods for the R3 zones. I certainly do look forward to seeing the monitoring program fleshed out fairly quickly. As you know, once a building is built, it may be with us for a century or 2 centuries. So I hope we will have some form of rapid response mechanism if, and dare I say, when we start to see more of this type of building occurring, because I would not want it to become the new existing condition of these streets.
Thank you. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Mr. Mayor, just a few questions for Mr. Smith. John, can you describe the difference between how a corner lot division would be dealt with pre and post infill 2 in the Trent Arlington community?
Mr. Mayor, the process that exists today and that would exist post-infill 2 is the same, with one little caveat of a difference, and that little caveat of a difference is fairly significant. Today an application would be made to the Committee of Adjustment for a severance and associated variances. That request would be looked at on the merits of that application, understanding overall intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw, how does it fit within the fabric and the character of the neighborhood, the lotting pattern, and so on. That would continue tomorrow, but the difference that would be in place tomorrow is that with the introduction of infill 2, where it specifically identifies areas and zones where corner lot severances are considered acceptable and appropriate, there's a much greater clarity in terms of intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw with respect to a corner lot severance. And given that Trent Arlington was not included as a neighborhood deemed appropriate for corner lot severances, it's a much more difficult argument that would have to be made to convince the Committee of Adjustment that in fact the intent and purpose, which is one of the 4 tests of the Planning Act, is in fact being met by an application in that neighborhood.
And just a quick follow-up question. If such an application was brought to the Committee Adjustments for variation, what would the city's response be? Would we object to such an application?
Within the context of the introduction of infill 2 and it specifying where corner lot severances are considered appropriate, I would venture to say that an application for corner lot severance in Trent Arlington would not be deemed to be in keeping with the intent and purpose of the zoning, so it would be met with a note of opposition to the Committee of Adjustment.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Great. And thank you, Councillor Aguilar. I know you've worked very hard on the motion and the issues that you've raised, so I appreciate that. Next is Councillor Leeper, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick things with some comments. First, a couple of our community associations have written to me to indicate that the public record is missing comments from January, March, April. I'd love to have a chat with you about potentially bringing in a technical amendment down the road to ensure that their participation has been fully noted in the record. But I do want to say thank you to staff, and especially the infill 2 rule rules follow on the heels of Infill 1. This has been a multi-year effort to establish a framework for infill that is going to facilitate infill, facilitate intensification, but at a much more sensitive scale than what we've seen to date. I am very grateful for the participation of groups like the Hintonburg Community Association, Champlain Park Community Association, working with the latter, for instance. Just in the past couple of weeks, we've been able to achieve some key changes in the R2 that the communities are particularly welcoming of. It is a privilege to work with these residents who are very expert. I'm glad that you've been open-minded to their input, and they're also remarkably eagle-eyed. There's going to be a period of monitoring to see how the new rules work. I will be watching and working with you really closely to ensure that residents are active participants in that monitoring to ensure that we're achieving the results that we want to achieve. And I do want to add as well that I hope that the equitable massing proposal that was made by the Federation of Citizens Associations stays in our back pocket over the course of the next couple of years as a potential response if we continue to see some of the abuses of infill that we've seen in past. I believe that it does have merit, and I hope it continues to bubble away in the back there. I'm very happy to support the framework rules that we're putting in place as amended by the motion that Chair Harder has brought through, and the other motions will have my support as well today. Thank you, staff, for a couple of years of very hard work. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you for those comments, Councillor. Councillor Nussbaum, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick comment and question for staff. I, too, am thankful for all the hard work, and specifically in the last few weeks. And I noted that a number of the comments that a number of people made with regard to projections were considered and amended appropriately. So I thank staff for being responsive on that issue. Just a question which relates to item 1A in the amended report. The proposal is to delete the sentence "and 1.5 meters from exterior sidewalls" from the second last sentence of the third paragraph under the heading of projections. I'm just wondering, Mr. Mayor, if staff can just give me an explanation as to why that sentence is proposed to be deleted.
Mr. Mayor, that sentence was left in the report and was not, it was an omission. The report was, staff started to work on the report in January, and there were still meetings happening and still revisions that ended up changing the approach that we were taking to how far from the edge wall you have to set back and access to a rooftop terrace. So that was simply an omission, and it's simply to reflect what actually is ending up in front of you today in terms of a zoning package to be adopted.
Okay, then that leads me to ask then, because if you look at the actual substantive part of the report, subparagraph 13, where the setbacks for rooftop projections are described, the description is that for the front and rear walls, that the setback would be equivalent to the height of the projection. And then in subsection B, it says that a minimum of 1.5 meters would be required as a setback from any side wall. Is that not the case, or are we taking the equivalent height of the projection as the setback on the side wall as well?
Mr. Mayor, the setbacks that we are putting in front of Council today are from the front and back, but not from the side walls. And the reason for this is typically where a staircase would be. A staircase would be against the side wall of a residential building. So it's a matter of construction efficiency to be able to get to the structure that lets you onto the rooftop where the stairs are going to be.
And is that a change from what we discussed at Planning Committee a few weeks ago?
It's not supposed to be, Mr. Mayor. We are simply correcting a sentence in the staff report that was left from a previous version from January. So the zoning package should reflect the regulations that I've just described, which is you set back from the front and back, but not from the sides.
But just to clarify, landscaped areas, rooftop gardens, and terraces are subject to a sidewall setback. You're saying the entrance to the staircase would not. But then you were in a situation where the rooftop access, the 2.7 meters, could technically be right on the edge of the building. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Anything else, Councillor?
Not at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hubly, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I just want to clarify something that was said earlier about basements. There's obviously examples that some of my colleagues see in the inner core of abuse of turning basements into apartments and stuff, but I think it's important to remember that in a lot of cases, such as what I see in my area, it's seniors who are retiring and they take their basement of their house and convert it into an apartment to help them pay the property taxes that we want and other living expenses so that they can keep their home. And I hope we don't do anything to prevent that. And there's also the other side of the equation where people convert their basements into apartments so that their children that are becoming 18, 19 years old that want to stay at home have some of that experience of what it's going to be like when they're out on their own. And so these types of apartments, whether to subsidize income or to provide housing for other family members, I hope that the intent of this bylaw will not be to try to stop that.
Mr. Mayor, the infill 2 is not changing permitted uses. Secondary dwelling units are permitted in various residential building types. That's not being changed as a result of infill 2. I think with respect to the whole issue of the basement, and I know this was an area of concern on the part of several communities, we did look at trying, as Mr. Megley's indicated, reducing it to 10 through workshops, discussions with our building code services staff, industry representation. 10 meters provides a very tight condition and may not necessarily account for circumstances and conditions that might exist on a property. The 11 meters accounts for traditional building techniques that are being used, and we're very comfortable, or 11 meters rather, we're very comfortable that 11 meters should be retained for 3 units. Whether or not the basement is up a little bit higher or lower, that will very much depend on the conditions that are being introduced as a result of that project, the conditions that exist on the property, and what's being intended. The intent is not to allow, as of right, the ability for conversions. That was dealt with through the conversions bylaw. I mean, as part of monitoring, we will keep an eye on what is happening on that front, and if we need to do something further, we will definitely follow up.
So to boil that down to a one-sentence reply, you would be saying that seniors don't have to worry about this?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cloutier, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Maire. Je me fais...
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank also all the community association and the personnel for all the work that has been done on this issue.
Councillor Eglai's questions about the department's disposition in commenting to a committee of adjustment. There are some lots that might be eligible under the infill 2 provision, but fall right under the current threshold of, let's say, an R1GG, the minimum lot size. If such a request were to be made to the Committee of Adjustment for what some might consider a minor variance and severance of a lot that is currently under the minimum 665 square meter lot size, what would be the disposition of the department in their comments on such an application?
Mr. Mayor, we do have to look at every application. I think the important thing to remember is the intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw is made much clearer. So if you're in a zone that indicates that that's a zone where a corner lot severance is considered to be appropriate, and there's some minor variances that might be required from an existing condition, those would be considered and reviewed, and if it fits within the overall intention and character and pattern of the neighborhood, there wouldn't be an adverse comment that would be advanced. If it's in a zone that's not specifically identified as a zone for a corner lot severance, then the position that would be advanced to the committee would be that this is not in keeping with the intent and purpose. So again, in your particular ward, Councillor, as you know, we did take another look at it, and the interior portions of Alta Vista have now been excluded as areas where corner lot severances would be considered appropriate. So in that situation, if an application were to come in that was not on one of the major streets, we would indicate opposition.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Merci. Conseiller Fleury is not at a seat. And then Councillor Harder, you're next.
Désolé, Monsieur le Maire, on essaie.
I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. We're trying to get more information on that 1.5 meter, which was just discussed. On my side, it's only to see what the efforts were done and to hear what the department has done. I'd like to stress the main objectives that were reached by protecting backyards. We have to take into account one of the big problems with infills. We've lost backyards. We've seen it in the Côte de Sable, in Sandy Hill, and one of the things that we want to protect is backyards, our backyards. A few modifications have been done, and as much there's going to be a disagreement between promoters and the communities, but I think we have to be very happy of the progress that's being done, especially as far as the backyard protection is concerned. When we lose backyards, I was going to talk about life quality, but it's the profitability of that space that is lost forever. And now, by protecting backyards and by having very strict and clear criteria as far as the number of meters that have to be protected, we can really have spaces that are protected and that can be enjoyed by all the neighborhood. So I'd like to stress that element, and I would also like to mention the efforts of the community to raise certain issues. And as I said in my motion, some of the elements that are at risk is the fact that we're adding sites one after another. That's going to have a different massing, but I think in that zone we can deal with some of those issues. Once again, I'd like to thank the personnel and the group on this file. We were talking about conversions, and it's a report that was in that went along with that exam, and I stress the issue of backyards.
Councillor Harder.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And just in case some of you saw a large group of us over kibitzing, if you will, over to the side, what that was about, and you might have heard Councillor Nussbaum was talking, and he questioned the aperture that would be on the roof for the exit onto the roof. And one of the things that we have always understood is that through the working process, 1.5 meters from the edge was going to be protected. And that really is the reason, so that the nearby neighboring neighbors, doesn't even make sense, but anyways, the next door neighbors, that they would not have somebody actually looking into their windows, their homes, whatever. It would give some privacy, but still allow people to enjoy the quality of life of a green kind of a roof and that sort of thing. So we just want to make sure that in reducing the height, we have still a protection for that 1.5 meters. So therefore, the direction that we've agreed to, that's coming through me to staff, in the reporting process that we're starting, the monitoring process, that this will be something that is their very first item to monitor. And we'll be looking for reports on that, should you see any. Because the staff, as I said earlier, have worked inclusively with the various residents, community associations, and the developers, and this is the understanding that they have as well. Okay? So we want to be on the record for that. And so just in closing then, Mr. Mayor,
please.
I appreciate all the hard work. There's been a lot of engagement from all members of council, not just the planning committee, and not even just people whose wards are included. For example, Councillor Eglai's area has been very engaged, and he's been very involved, even though he's not part of the infill area. And Councillor Shirelli and I were talking about when the CDP is done for Bell's Corners, that some of these very factors are going to be ones that he's going to want to instill into his community design plan. So it's been a long road. It's been a great working group that I know that we all have benefited from a different style. So I want to thank the staff again for all their hard work. It's important work, and I'm very proud of the fact that Ottawa is leading on infill in North America. Thank you.
Right, and I'd like to thank Councillor Harder and Councillor Tierney as the chair and vice chair. This is, as you know, one of the committees that does a lot of heavy lifting and very technical in nature, and I appreciate all of the input of members of council on this particular issue. So we have a number of amendments. The first is the technical amendments to the report from Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney. Carried. The next is by Councillor Eglai, seconded by Councillor Cloutier, with respect to corner lot severances and distinctive trees. Carried. Carried. The next is by Councillor Fleury, seconded by Councillor Harder, low-rise infill housing study apartment building. Carried. The next is by Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Tierney, with respect enactment date of July 8th, 2015. Carried. Carried. On the main report as amended. Carried. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. The next item that has been taken from the vote consent agenda is Councillor Eglai, and it's item number G, which is zoning bylaw amendment 15 Colonnade Road North, modification au règlement de zonage 15 Chemin Colonnade Nord. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of quick questions, clarification for Ms. Snedden. The report indicates that staff will ensure that the existing pathway through the property will be kept accessible for the purposes of the Nepean Trail cycling proposal, which is part of the current TMP. But it doesn't say how that will happen. Can you clarify what steps planning would take in order to ensure that that link in the Nepean Trail is kept in place?
Mr. Mayor, we do not have the authority currently under the zoning report that's before you to acquire the land, but we do, however, have the legal authority to acquire those lands through either subdivision or site plan process. And in this case, it will be through a site plan process. The owner of the lands have acknowledged the requirement for dedication for that trail. And we are going to be taking that as part of the site plan process. It's identified in the OP, the TMP, and the cycling plan, so we will be acquiring that.
Okay. So what I was going to ask, because this is a big project in my ward and people are very excited about it, is to take direction to do that. But I think you've just said you're going to do that. So direction's there, I think.
Mr. Mayor, we will take direction.
Okay. Thanks so much.
Great. On that item, carried. Motion to adopt reports. Motion portant adoption de rapport. Councillor XemK and lPsoUk, please.
Que le rapport de la Société de portefeuille d'hydro...
That the report from Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc., entitled Hydro Ottawa Holding Inc., 2014 Annual Report, Audit Committee Report 4, Community and Protective Services Committee Report 5, Environment Committee Report 4, Finance and Economic Development Committee Report 5A, Planning Committee Reports 8A and 9, and Transit Commission Report 4 be received and adopted as amended. Carried.
Motions of which notice have been previously given. Motion dont avis a été donné entièrement. Moved by Councillor El Shantiri, seconded by myself. Councillor El Shantiri, if you'd like to introduce the motion, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Your Worship, as you know, this is a piece of land at the corner of Fall Down Street and Donald B. Monroe, and the community came together and they raised some fund to have the West Carlton War Memorial in that corner. And they raised about $100,000, and some of the money will be matched by National Defense and for the rest of the... What they're asking here is there's an application for road closure and then dedicate the space as a city parkland and closure of the road, and then will be returned, I believe, to the city. So there's a cost of $9,421. So what we're asking here for the council to waive that fee to help that community to purify that part of the city. They're going to be spending close to $200,000 once it's all complete. So therefore, be it resolved, the city council approved that the fee for the road closure at the junction of Donald B. Monroe Drive and Fall Down Lane, expected to the amount of $9,421, be waived in order to allow the construction of the West Carlton War Memorial and the future designation of this public space as a parkland.
Carried.
Carried? Thank you. I'd like to know the significance and history of the lane, Fall Down Lane, at some point, Councillor. That's right. Councillor Chernyshenko has a motion. It's been, previous notice has been given, seconded by Councillor Shirelli on ORAP, the Ottawa River Action Plan. Councillor Chernyshenko, please.
Thank you very much, and I will just read the main point at the end, but this is effectively provides the authority to our city manager to dot the I's and cross the T's, so to speak, on funding from the other levels of government should we be in a position to have to respond quickly when that occasion arises, especially as we are hoping to move into summer break sometime soon. And so I thank Councillor Shirelli for actually pointing out that we should, if possible, retain final decision-making, final approval here with Council, but only if it's feasible to do so with the timelines, if in fact we have the opportunity to come back to Council. Otherwise, it would be delegated. So, therefore, be it resolved that delegated authority be given to the city manager to approve and execute the federal funding agreement and the provincial funding agreement and any future federal and provincial amending agreements consistent with council budget approval for the combined sewage storage tunnel, should there not be an ability to bring forward the agreements to Environment Committee and Council due to the legislative agenda timetable. And be it further resolved that should the city manager be required to approve and execute the agreement due to legislative agenda timelines, the members of Council be advised that the agreements are available for their review prior to the city manager's approval.
Okay, on the motion, carried. Next is a motion by Councillor McKenney, seconded by Councillor Nussbaum, with respect to the Henry Harper Memorial, also known as the Sir Galahad Memorial outside Parliament Hill.
That's right. This is, I'm bringing this as a favor, actually, from on behalf of the Canadian government. Another Harper. Not that he asked me personally, but it's a personal favor. If you're talking to him. Can we move the memorial? No, I'm joking. So this is the Henry Harper Memorial that's been in place since 1905 on the north side of Wellington Street, facing the head of Metcalfe. And it's just so that the Department of Canadian Heritage has the ability to place temporary interpretive signage to provide additional information with respect to the memorial. So therefore, be it resolved that the General Manager of Public Works and Services authorities, in consultation with the city clerk and solicitor, be delegated the authority to enter into an agreement with the Department of Canadian Heritage to permit the placement of temporary signage within the city's right-of-way without the requirement of a fee from July 1st, 2015 until August 31st, 2015. My favor.
Okay,
To that.
thank you. So, Councillor McKenney is supporting a Harper motion. See that? Carried. Carried is the first. Thank you. Second, next is Councillor Harder, seconded by Councillor Hubley with respect to the whistle at Via Crossing on Greenbank. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And this was notice of motion I gave at last council, as you know. Therefore, be it resolved that City Council hereby gives public notice of its intention to pass this train whistling cessation resolution, declaring it agrees that train whistles be prohibited at the Greenbank Road temporary detour railway grade crossing located at mileage 5.07 on Smith Falls subdivision, including delegating to the city manager to provide proper notification to the relevant organizations as required. Mr. Mayor, there is a process that needs to be followed any time that you're making this request, and back in 1985, Nepean Council requested that all of the significant crossings, which at that time, of course, excluded the transitway because it wasn't built at the time, that there be no whistleblowing, and it went through the same process. What has triggered the whistleblowing at this one crossing is the fact that we are undertaking a massive reconstruction, widening, and an underpass of the tracks at Greenbank Road, on Greenbank Road. And because the road has been detoured marginally to the east in order to cross at a different point, that triggered the reaction because it had been moved. But it's still the Greenbank Road crossing. Staff are here today if anyone has any questions. The project leader, Karina Diclos, and Sue Johns, and of course Wayne Newell. And also this morning, it might have been too late for you to see it before you came down here, but Karina had sent me further information on what their arrangement is and will be with VIA on continuing the monitoring of what they're doing now. Currently, they have a flag person, for example, that stops the traffic between 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. And this other activities, Karina says, it could include is monitor collision accidents on the road nearby the crossing, monitor the train crew reports, but there's already a process in place, and they are inspecting the crossing monthly, and the lights are verified every 7 days. Besides that, to get to this point where we have it before us today, there was a very extensive safety audit done that VIA accepted as being well done, I would think. Is that, Wayne? That they accepted as being, they received it and accepted it as being valid, the safety audit.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, the VIA has seen the safety assessment and have confirmed that it is compliant with all standards and regulations and is in fact eligible for consideration of cessation of the whistling.
So there's still more process to go, but I would ask you that you support this initiative today.
Okay, just one minor correction. It's Smiths Falls, plural, and apostrophe S instead of Smith Fall. Councillor Kakish, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to staff. What are the safety implications of moving forward with this motion?
Mr. Mayor, today we have a specialist with us, our railway safety specialist, Mr. Bob Fish, and I think it would be best for him to come down and provide a few comments and his opinion in the matter.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I guess I was the author of the safety assessment for the Greenbank Detour Road crossing. I can confirm that the crossing was constructed to current day standards. It meets the regulatory requirements that were introduced in November of last year. When it comes to whistling at crossings, certainly whistling does not decrease the level of safety, but when I was working with Transport Canada back in the 1990s, we did there was some concern about the effect of whistling at the crossings. We hired a specialist in statistics, looked at the before and after collision rates, and the result was that if the crossings were brought up to current day standards, there was no statistically significant difference in the accident rates before and after whistling was ceased at the crossing.
Anything else, Councillor Kakis?
No, that's all. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires? Any other questions or comments? On the motion? Carried. All dissent. Dissent by Councillor Eglai, Shirelli, Deans, Monette. Okay. Thank you. Next is motions requiring suspension of the rules of procedure. Are there any? Notices of motion for consideration at subsequent meeting. We have a number of them. So I'd remind you just a very brief explanation as to what these motions are, as they'll be dealt with in their entirety at the following meeting in July. First one is by Councillor El Shantiri, seconded by Councillor Moffat, ground-mounted solar FIT program project applications. Councillor.
So, Mr. Mayor, because July, I heard from the clerk, is going to be heavy-duty meeting, we can probably waive the rules. They are basically, it's easy. West Carton and Rio Goulburn, obviously they're turning green, so really this is motherhood motion to let the FIT take place in those areas. So with your permission, maybe we can waive the rule and pass them today, so July doesn't, it's up to you, I'm in your hands. So.
The deputy clerk, Mr. Councillor El Shantiri, has indicated there's already one technical change required by staff. So okay. I appreciate your notion because the July meeting will be heavy. So I think maybe it's best that we keep this as a notice of motion. If you're okay with that.
Yes, more than okay, Mr. Mayor. Okay. So moved by myself, second by Councillor Moffat. This resolution, it has. Basically is where the province's feed-in program encourage the construction of operation of rooftop solar generation project, rooftop solar projects. So this is one motion, and the other motion, if I may, Mr. Mayor, almost is the same, except the other one, it talks for more than one application, and there's more than one area. So instead of keep having those motion coming to us individually, so this I think will take care of most of them between Ward 5, Ward 20, and Ward 21. So, and therefore be it resolved that Council approve the individual motions of support for the ground-mounted solar FIT program project application listed as appendix through. And there's a whole bunch of motions listed as well. So that's as a notice of motion for next meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Great. So those are the Councillor El Shantiri has spoken to both his motions, seconded by Councillor Moffat, and I think we should be proud. I believe it's in Goleta that they have the largest solar farm in eastern Ontario. So that's terrific. Thank you. Next is a motion by Councillor Harder, notice of motion rather by Councillor Harder, seconded by myself with respect to the designation of Memorial Park at Fallowfield Station. Councillor Harder, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for seconding this motion. As you know, recently we approved park designation for the location of the memorial at Fallowfield Park and Ride. And so I was tasked with going away to talk with the families and to come up with a name. And after doing that, they have supported the designation of, and this is what it would be called, Memorial Park at Fallowfield Station. So this is a notice of motion, and I'll be asking for support of that at the next council meeting. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Councillor, for your work with the families as well. The next notice of motion is by Councillor Middick, seconded by Councillor Monette, with respect to the Miracle League of Ottawa.
Thank you, Mayor. As we know, we have the Miracle League, our first fully accessible baseball field happening in Ottawa, and this is just a motion to name the clubhouse in honor of one of the paid sponsors for the project, and that'll be coming at the next council meeting.
Great, and that would be Jay's Care Field, Terrain Jay's Care. So we'll bring that up at the next meeting. Appreciate that, Councillor. Our next notice of motion is by Councillor Nussbaum, seconded by Councillor Deans, with respect to urban lanes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a motion that will seek council approval for an extension of a road closure application that was submitted to the city following from a council direction to staff to explore the feasibility of a pilot project on rear lane sale to abutting residential landowners. And since it would otherwise expire this summer, we're seeking a 4-month extension. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Nussbaum. Next notice of motion is by Councillor Wilkinson, seconded by Councillor Caudry. With respect to Global Health Sciences Organization, Councillor, or rather the renewal of its nuclear substance processing facility license. Councillor.
That's, Mr. Mayor. This is Nordian has to get a renewal of their license for having radioactive materials for making the radioactive isotopes that are used for health procedures around the world, and this is just a motion to have us support that application.
Okay. Are there any other motions, rather notices of motion, excuse me? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres motions? No.
Any other notices?
Motion portant présentation de règlement. Councillor Chernishenko, seconded by Councillor El Shantiri, please.
Que les règlements énumérés à l'ordre
That the bylaws listed on the agenda under motion to introduce bylaws, 3 readings, be read and passed. Carried. That the following bylaw be read and passed to confirm the proceedings of the council meeting of 24th June 2015. Carried. Est-ce qu'il y a des demandes de renseignement? Par écrit, je rappelle au public, au conseil, que le trésorier et le sous-trésorier vont nous offrir un cours d'introduction aux finances ce soir, et le document sera, ou la vidéo sera sur notre site web.
La réunion.
So all the details will be on the website, ottawa.ca.
I think they meet 7:30, and
My apologies. You're right. 7:30 tonight. Il y a une session en français.
There will be a session in French and one in English.
Town hall starts at 7. Great. Thank you. Motion to adjourn. Councillor Chernishenko, please.
que la réunion du Conseil du 20...
That the proceedings of the City Council meeting of June 24th be adjourned. Carried.
Being adjourned.